Welcome to Northern Mystery Archives. Here we don't soften the truth and we don't skip the details. We investigate the forgotten files from the far north of Canada, the disappearances that were quietly shelved, the settlements that faded from every map, the transmissions that were never meant to be heard again. In this channel, nothing is hidden. Every fragment, every silence, every erased trail is examined with the seriousness these cases deserved but never received. If you value cold, atmospheric, minimalist investigations into the unexplained wilderness of the North, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and step with us into the files they hoped no one would ever revisit. Below, we will be speaking about the case titled Exactly, Eloise Trent, March 3rd, 1985, Unexplained Abandoned Mine Incident. It all began when... No investigator's initials scrawled in the corner, just a brittle manila sleeve containing 14 pages of typewritten reports, 3 hand-drawn site maps, and a single black-and-white photograph of a woman standing beside a pickup truck parked on frozen ground. Her name appears only once in the official record. Eloise Trent, age 27. Last documented contact with any living person occurred late afternoon on March 3rd. The year marked down as 1985. The file was opened by regional authorities following a delayed report from a resource extraction company operating in the Northern Territories. The report itself arrived 6 days after the incident was believed to have occurred. No explanation was provided for the delay. No clarification was offered regarding why the company waited nearly a week before notifying anyone that one of their contract surveyors had failed to return from a routine site assessment. By the time search crews reached the location, the trail had already gone cold. What remains is a collection of contradictory statements, incomplete logs, and unanswered questions that were never resolved. The investigation was officially suspended after 4 months. The file was transferred to cold storage. The name Eloise Trent was removed from active missing persons databases. Her disappearance became one more case absorbed into the silence of the boreal wilderness where answers go to die. There are places in the far northern territories where human activity leaves barely a mark. Forests stretch uninterrupted for hundreds of kilometers. Lakes freeze solid for 8 months of the year. Roads exist only as suggestions, gravel trails that wash out with spring melt and are reclaimed by the bush before summer ends. Settlements are temporary. Mining operations come and go. The wilderness remains. In early spring of that year, a small contract surveying team was dispatched to an abandoned mining site located approximately 230 kilometers northwest of a regional supply depot. The site had been inactive for over a decade. Records indicated the mine had been operational during the late 60s and early 70s before declining ore quality forced closure. The structures had been left in place. No decommissioning work had been completed. No environmental assessments had been conducted. The site simply sat empty, slowly being reclaimed by snow and forest. The surveying team was hired to assess the feasibility of reopening partial operations. Their work involved documenting existing infrastructure, testing soil stability, and mapping underground access points that might still be structurally sound. Eloise Trent was brought in as a secondary surveyor. Her role was to verify measurements and provide independent assessment of subsurface conditions. She arrived at the staging camp on the evening of March 1st. 2 days later, she was gone. The photograph in the file shows her standing beside a white pickup truck. The image is slightly out of focus. Her face is turned partially away from the camera. She wears a heavy parka with the hood pulled back. Dark hair is visible beneath a wool cap. Her gloved hands rest at her sides. Behind her, the forest forms a dense wall of black spruce and jack pine. The ground is covered in snow. No footprints are visible. No other people appear in the frame. The photo bears no date stamp. No notation explains who took the image or when. According to the file, Eloise had been working in remote survey operations for approximately 3 years prior to this assignment. Her employment records indicate she had completed projects in northern Alberta, the Northwest Territories, and eastern British Columbia. Her references described her as competent, reliable, and comfortable working in isolated conditions. There were no disciplinary notes in her file, no reports of conflict with previous team members, no indication she had ever failed to complete an assignment. The company that hired her operated under a numbered corporate entity registered in a southern city. The abandoned mine site occupied a remote valley carved between 2 parallel ridgelines running northwest to southeast. The valley floor sat at an elevation of approximately 900 meters. Dense boreal forest covered the surrounding slopes. Black spruce dominated the canopy. Thick stands of alder choked the lower elevations. The ground remained frozen from October through late April. Permafrost extended to depths exceeding 15 meters in some locations. Access to the site required traveling along a deteriorated forestry road that branched off from a secondary logging route. The forestry road had not been maintained in over 10 years. Sections had washed out during spring floods. Fallen trees blocked portions of the route. In winter, the road existed only as a slight depression beneath snow cover. Navigation required familiarity with the terrain or detailed topographic maps. GPS coverage in the region was unreliable. Satellite positioning systems frequently failed to acquire signals due to the valley's orientation and the density of overhead tree cover. The mining operation itself consisted of 6 primary structures and multiple secondary installations. A processing shed stood near the eastern end of the valley. The structure measured approximately 12 meters by 20 meters. The roof had partially collapsed. The exterior walls remained largely intact despite years of exposure to winter weather. Inside, rusted machinery sat frozen in place. Conveyor belts hung slack from overhead supports. Metal sorting trays were stacked against the north wall. Everything was coated in a layer of dust and ice. Adjacent to the processing shed stood a bunkhouse that had once housed workers during operational periods. The building was a single-story prefabricated structure raised on concrete piers to prevent ground frost from warping the foundation. Windows had been boarded over with plywood sheets. The main entrance door hung slightly ajar. Interior spaces were dark and cold. Bunks lined the walls. A small kitchen area occupied the rear of the building. Plates and cups still sat on shelves. A calendar on the wall displayed a month from over a decade prior. Farther into the valley, a generator shed sat isolated from the other structures. The diesel generator inside had been stripped of valuable components. Fuel tanks were empty and corroded. Electrical cables running from the shed to the other buildings lay collapsed in the snow. The entire site felt frozen in time, abandoned mid-operation, as though the workers had simply walked away one day and never returned. The mine entrance itself was located at the base of the western ridgeline. The opening was a horizontal adit driven directly into the rock face. Timber supports framed the entrance. Railroad tracks extended out from the opening and ran approximately 30 meters before disappearing beneath snow and accumulated debris. A metal gate had been installed across the entrance at some point following the mine's closure. The gate hung open. The lock that once secured it lay broken in the snow. Site documentation from the surveying team indicated that the mine extended at least 400 meters into the hillside. Multiple lateral tunnels branched off from the main shaft. Vertical shafts connected different levels. The interior structure was complex. No complete map of the underground passages had been located. The company that originally operated the mine had ceased to exist. Records had been lost or destroyed. What remained was incomplete, contradictory, and decades out of date. The weather during the first week of March that year had been unusually mild for the region. Daytime temperatures rose above freezing. Snow began to soften. Meltwater pooled in low-lying areas. Nights remained cold enough to refreeze the surface, creating a crust of ice over the snow. Travel conditions were treacherous. Snowshoes broke through the crust. Vehicles became mired in slush. The transition between winter and spring in the Northern Territories is often the most dangerous time of year for anyone working in remote locations. The surveying team established their base camp approximately 1 kilometre south of the mine site. They chose a location on elevated ground near a frozen creek. Tents were erected, a cooking area was set up. A radio transceiver was positioned to maintain periodic contact with the regional supply depot. Communication protocols required daily check-ins at predetermined times. If a check-in was missed, protocol dictated that a secondary attempt would be made after 4 hours. If the secondary attempt also failed, a search and rescue response would be initiated within 24 hours. The team consisted of 5 individuals, a lead surveyor, 2 assistants, a site foreman, and Eloise Trent. According to statements provided to investigators, the team had been working at the site for 2 days before the incident occurred. They had completed initial assessments of the exterior structures. They had documented the condition of the processing shed and the bunkhouse. They had begun preliminary mapping of the mine entrance and the immediate underground passages. Eloise had been assigned to conduct a solo assessment of the deeper sections of the mine. She was to document structural integrity, measure air quality, and identify any potential hazards that might complicate future operations. She was equipped with a handheld radio, a flashlight, a helmet-mounted lamp, a clipboard with data sheets, and a canvas satchel containing additional equipment. She was instructed to remain in radio contact throughout the assessment. The last confirmed radio transmission from Eloise Trent was logged at 2:43 in the afternoon. The transmission lasted approximately 8 seconds. Her voice was described by the site foreman as calm and unremarkable. She stated she had reached a junction where the main shaft intersected with a lateral tunnel. She indicated she was preparing to explore the lateral passage. She did not report any difficulties. She did not request assistance. She did not express concern about her surroundings. The transmission ended. No further contact was established. Initial attempts to re-establish radio communication began at 3:15. The lead surveyor attempted to raise Eloise on the assigned frequency. He received no response. He attempted again at 3:30. Again, no response. By 4 o'clock, concern among the team had escalated. The site foreman made the decision to enter the mine and locate her. He was accompanied by one of the surveyor assistants. Both men carried additional lighting equipment and spare radio batteries. They entered the mine at 4:20 in the afternoon. The 2 men followed the main shaft inward. They moved carefully, calling out Eloise's name at regular intervals. The tunnel was dark and cold, their breath condensed in the frigid air. The beams from their helmet lamps illuminated rough-hewn rock walls and timber support beams. The railroad tracks continued deeper into the hillside. They reached the junction Eloise had described in her final transmission. The main shaft continued straight. A lateral tunnel branched off to the left. They paused at the junction and shouted her name. No response came from either direction. They chose to follow the lateral tunnel. The passage was narrower than the main shaft. The ceiling was lower. They proceeded single file. The walls showed signs of old water seepage. Ice had formed in thin sheets along the rock surfaces. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. After advancing approximately 50 meters, they encountered a collapse. A section of the tunnel ceiling had given way. Rock and debris blocked the passage entirely. The collapse appeared recent. Loose material was scattered across the floor. Dust still hung in the air. The 2 men examined the collapse closely. They searched for any indication that Eloise had been caught in the fall. They found no clothing fragments, no equipment, no blood, no signs of human presence. The collapse seemed to have occurred in isolation, blocking the passage, but leaving no trace of anyone being trapped within or beyond it. They shouted into the debris pile. They listened for any sound of movement or response. They heard nothing but the faint drip of meltwater somewhere deeper in the mountain. They retraced their steps to the junction and proceeded down the main shaft. The tunnel descended gradually. The air grew colder. The railroad tracks curved gently to the right. They advanced for another 100 meters before encountering a vertical shaft that dropped away into darkness. A wooden ladder was affixed to one wall. The rungs appeared old and unreliable. The men paused at the edge and directed their lights downward. The beams disappeared into blackness. They shouted Eloise's name into the shaft. The sound echoed and faded. No response returned. By this point, nearly 2 hours had passed since they entered the mine. The men made the decision to return to the surface and organize a more comprehensive search. They emerged from the mine entrance at approximately 6:30 in the evening. Daylight was fading. The temperature was dropping. The site foreman immediately attempted to contact the regional supply depot via the camp radio. The transmission was garbled by atmospheric interference. He managed to convey that a team member was missing inside the mine. He requested additional personnel and equipment. He was instructed to maintain position and continue search efforts until support arrived. A second search was conducted that evening. All remaining team members entered the mine. They split into 2 groups. One group retraced the route taken earlier. The second group explored alternative passages branching off from the main shaft. They carried additional lighting, rope, and emergency medical supplies. They searched for over 3 hours. They found no trace of Eloise, no equipment, no footprints in the dust, no marks on the walls. No indication she had ever been in the sections of the mine they explored. The search was suspended at midnight due to safety concerns. The men were exhausted. Battery power for their lights was running low. The risk of further collapses or becoming disoriented in the maze of tunnels was deemed too high to continue. They returned to camp and attempted to rest. No one slept. The camp radio remained active throughout the night in case Eloise managed to make contact. She did not. Additional search personnel arrived late the following afternoon. A team of 6 experienced mine rescue specialists was deployed from a regional emergency response unit. They brought specialized equipment, including portable generators, high-intensity lighting systems, gas detectors, and ground-penetrating radar units. They entered the mine at dusk on March 4th, and conducted a systematic search of all accessible tunnels and shafts. The search continued for 3 full days. Every passage was explored, every chamber was documented, every vertical shaft was descended and examined. The mine was far more extensive than initial estimates had suggested. The tunnels extended over 700 meters into the hillside. Some passages had collapsed entirely. Others were flooded with ice-cold water. Several sections were deemed too unstable to enter safely. No trace of Eloise Trent was discovered. On the evening of March 7th, the search was officially suspended. The lead rescue specialist stated that all accessible areas of the mine had been thoroughly examined. He concluded that if Eloise had been trapped in a collapsed section, her body was buried beyond the reach of available equipment. If she had fallen down one of the flooded shafts, recovery would be impossible without specialized diving equipment and structural reinforcement. If she had somehow exited the mine and wandered into the surrounding wilderness, tracking her in the current conditions would be futile. The surveying team was evacuated from the site on March 8th. The formal investigation into the disappearance of Eloise Trent began on March 10th, 2 days after the search team withdrew from the mine site. The case was assigned to a regional investigator based out of a detachment located over 400 kilometers south of the incident location. The investigator's name appears in the file as a redacted signature. No identifying information is provided. No personnel records are attached. The investigator is referred to only by a badge number throughout the documentation. The first step involved interviewing the 4 surviving members of the surveying team. The interviews were conducted individually over a period of 3 days. Each team member provided a written statement. The statements were largely consistent. All 4 individuals confirmed that Eloise had entered the mine alone on the afternoon of March 3rd. All confirmed that radio contact had been maintained initially and then lost. All confirmed that immediate search efforts had been undertaken. None of the individuals expressed any knowledge of what might have happened to her. The lead surveyor stated that Eloise had been in good spirits on the morning of her disappearance. She had eaten breakfast with the team. She had reviewed the site maps. She had checked her equipment. There had been no indication of distress or reluctance to proceed with the assigned task. He stated that she was experienced in underground survey work and had expressed confidence in her ability to complete the assessment. The site foreman's statement was more detailed. He described the sequence of events leading up to the loss of radio contact. He provided precise times for each attempted communication. He explained his decision to enter the mine to search for her. He described finding the collapsed section of the lateral tunnel. He stated that he believed the collapse might have been triggered by seasonal ground movement due to freeze-thaw cycles affecting the surrounding rock. He offered no explanation for why Eloise's equipment or body had not been found near the collapse site. The 2 surveyor assistants provided statements that added little new information. Both confirmed the timeline. Both confirmed that they participated in the search efforts. One assistant mentioned that he thought he heard a faint sound while searching the main shaft on the night of March 3rd. He described it as a distant metallic noise, possibly the sound of something falling or scraping against rock. He stated that he called out but received no response. He stated that he continued searching but found nothing. The other assistant made no mention of hearing anything unusual. The investigator traveled to the mine site on March 14th. He was accompanied by a forensic technician and a photographer. The group spent 2 days at the location. They documented the camp area. They photographed the mine entrance. They entered the mine and explored the accessible passages. They collected samples of rock and soil. They took measurements of the collapsed section. They documented the locations of all equipment left behind by the search team. The forensic technician noted several anomalies. First, no personal items belonging to Eloise were found anywhere in the mine. Her clipboard, satchel, flashlight and radio were all missing. Second, the dust on the tunnel floors showed no clear footprints. The technician noted that the consistency of the dust should have preserved any tracks made by someone walking through the passages. The absence of tracks suggested that either the floors had been disturbed by air currents or water seepage, or that no one had walked through those sections recently. Third, the collapsed section of the lateral tunnel showed signs of being older than initially believed. The technician estimated that the collapse had occurred weeks or possibly months before the surveying team arrived at the site. This finding directly contradicted the site foreman's belief that the collapse had been recent and possibly related to Eloise's disappearance. If the collapse predated her entry into the mine, then it could not have been the cause of her vanishing. This raised a new and troubling question. If Eloise had encountered the collapsed tunnel, why had she not reported it via radio and simply returned to the surface? Why had her transmission ceased without any indication of a problem? The investigator reviewed the radio logs. The equipment used by the surveying team operated on a VHF frequency with a range of approximately 5 kilometers under optimal conditions. Underground, the range would be significantly reduced by rock interference. However, the radio should have remained functional within the main shaft and the immediately adjacent passages. The log showed that Eloise's radio had been transmitting normally up until the moment contact was lost. There was no indication of equipment malfunction. The signal simply stopped. A technical analysis of the radio equipment was conducted. The unit assigned to Eloise was located in the camp's equipment cache. It had not been taken into the mine during the search. The lead surveyor explained that Eloise had been carrying her own personal radio unit, not the one from the cache. The personal unit was never recovered. Testing of the cache unit showed it to be fully functional. No defects were detected. The investigator attempted to locate records related to the original mining operation. He contacted the provincial mining authority. He requested historical documents, operational reports, and closure assessments. The authority provided a limited file containing basic information. The mine had been registered under a different name than the surveying team had been using. The original operation had ceased in the early 70s due to declining ore yields and rising operational costs. No formal decommissioning had been conducted. The mine had been abandoned in place. Responsibility for the site had transferred to the provincial government by default. No budget had been allocated for securing or monitoring the location. Maps of the mine's interior were located in the historical file. The maps were hand-drawn and dated from the late 60s. They showed a complex network of tunnels and shafts extending far beyond what the search team had explored. Several passages were marked as unstable, others were labeled as flooded or blocked. One section of the map bore a handwritten notation that had faded with age. The notation read, "Lower East Passage, do not enter, subsidence risk." The investigator compared the historical maps to the site maps created by the surveying team. Discrepancies were immediately apparent. Several tunnels shown on the historical maps did not appear on the recent surveys. Conversely, the recent surveys showed passages that were not documented in the historical records. It became clear that the mine had undergone changes over the decades. Collapses had sealed some routes. New openings had formed due to ground shifts. The interior layout was no longer reliable. A second site visit was planned for early April. The investigator intended to bring a larger team and conduct a more extensive exploration of the deeper sections. However, the visit was postponed due to spring flooding that rendered the access road impassable. By the time conditions improved, budget constraints forced the cancellation of the planned operation. The case remained open, but was effectively suspended due to lack of resources and competing priorities. In late May, a forestry patrol operating in a region approximately 70 kilometers northeast of the mine site reported finding a piece of surveying equipment near an abandoned logging camp. The equipment was a canvas satchel containing data sheets, a measuring tape, and several pencils. The satchel matched the description of the one Eloise had been carrying. The forestry patrol delivered the satchel to regional authorities. The satchel was forwarded to the investigator. Examination of the satchel revealed no obvious signs of damage. The canvas was weathered but intact. The contents were damp but legible. The data sheets bore notes in Eloise's handwriting. The notes described measurements and observations consistent with underground survey work. The final entry on the last sheet read, "Junction reached, lateral passage evident, proceeding west." The discovery of the satchel 70 kilometers from the mine site raised immediate questions. How had the satchel traveled such a distance? Had Eloise somehow exited the mine and traveled northeast through the wilderness before succumbing to exposure? Had the satchel been carried by an animal? Had it been moved by a third party? The investigator ordered a search of the area where the satchel was found. A team of 2 officers was dispatched. They searched for 3 days. They found no additional evidence, no clothing, no remains, no other equipment. The disappearance of Eloise Trent generated multiple theories, none of which have been conclusively proven or disproven. The lack of physical evidence, the contradictory findings, and the remote location of the incident have left the case open to interpretation and speculation. 5 primary theories emerged during the investigation and in the years that followed. The first theory holds that Eloise became disoriented inside the mine and wandered into a section that subsequently collapsed, burying her beneath tons of rock. Proponents of this theory point to the inherent instability of abandoned mines. They argue that freeze-thaw cycles, water seepage, and decades of neglect create conditions where collapses can occur suddenly and without warning. They suggest that Eloise may have triggered a collapse simply by walking through a weakened passage, and that her body remains entombed in a location that was never searched. The theory is supported by the fact that several collapsed sections were documented during the search. It is undermined by the absence of any evidence near those collapses and by the forensic technician's assessment that the collapses appeared to predate her entry into the mine. The second theory proposes that Eloise fell into one of the mine's flooded shafts and drowned. The mine contained several vertical shafts that dropped into water-filled chambers. Some of these shafts were partially concealed by debris or darkness. The theory suggests that Eloise, while exploring a passage, stepped too close to the edge of a shaft and fell. The freezing water would have incapacitated her within minutes. Her body would have sunk into the depths, making recovery impossible without specialized diving equipment. This theory is consistent with the absence of surface evidence. It is contradicted by the fact that no sounds of distress were transmitted via radio before contact was lost. If Eloise had fallen, it is likely she would have cried out or transmitted a distress call before the radio was submerged. The third theory suggests that Eloise exited the mine through an alternative opening and became lost in the surrounding wilderness. The historical maps indicated that the mine had multiple entrances and ventilation shafts. Some of these openings may have been obscured by vegetation or snow. The theory holds that Eloise, after encountering difficulties in the main shaft, located a secondary exit and emerged at a different point in the valley. Disoriented and uncertain of her location, she attempted to navigate back to the camp, but instead wandered deeper into the forest. Exposure to freezing temperatures combined with the onset of night would have led to hypothermia and death. Her body would have been concealed by snow and terrain. The discovery of her satchel 70 kilometers away lends some credence to this theory. However, the distance involved and the absence of any tracks or other evidence make this explanation difficult to accept. The fourth theory introduces the possibility of foul play. This theory emerged from irregularities in the statements provided by the surveying team and the subsequent dissolution of the contracting company. Proponents of this theory suggest that Eloise may have witnessed or discovered something at the mine site that placed her at risk. They point to the fact that the company employing her vanished shortly after the incident. They note that none of the team members had extensive backgrounds in surveying work. They speculate that the entire operation may have been a cover for illegal activity, possibly related to resource theft or environmental violations. According to this theory, Eloise was silenced to prevent her from reporting what she had seen. Her body was concealed, and the disappearance was staged to resemble an accident. This theory is supported by the lack of evidence and the convenient dissolution of the company. It is undermined by the absence of any concrete proof of wrongdoing and by the logistical difficulties involved in concealing a body in such a remote and thoroughly searched location. The fifth theory is the most unsettling and the least verifiable. It proposes that Eloise encountered something inside the mine that defies conventional explanation. Witnesses in the region have reported strange phenomena associated with abandoned mining sites. Unexplained lights are sometimes seen near old mine entrances. Sounds described as metallic scraping or distant voices have been reported by individuals working in the vicinity of long-closed operations. Some local residents avoid certain mine sites entirely, claiming that the places are wrong in ways they cannot articulate. This theory suggests that Eloise entered a section of the mine where the normal rules of the physical world do not fully apply. She did not die, she did not leave. She simply ceased to exist in any form that can be detected or understood. This theory has no basis in verifiable fact. It exists as folklore, as a story told to explain the inexplicable. Yet it persists because no other explanation adequately accounts for all the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. The investigator assigned to the case never formally endorsed any single theory. His final report, filed in September of that year, concluded that insufficient evidence existed to determine the cause or circumstances of Eloise Trent's disappearance. The report recommended that the case remain open pending the discovery of new evidence. No new evidence has been discovered. The abandoned mine site was visited once more in the years following Eloise Trent's disappearance. A private contractor hired by a resource development firm conducted a preliminary assessment in the early 90s. The firm was interested in evaluating whether modern extraction techniques might make reopening the operation economically viable. The contractor spent 3 days at the site. His report noted that the structures had deteriorated significantly. The bunkhouse had partially collapsed. The processing shed was a ruin. The mine entrance remained open, though the gate had rusted through and fallen. The contractor entered the main shaft briefly, but retreated after encountering unstable conditions. His report concluded that the site was not worth further investment. The mine was left to continue its slow decay. No further commercial interest in the site has been recorded. The location is not marked on most current maps. The access road has degraded to the point of being impassable except by foot or specialized off-road vehicles. The valley has returned to wilderness. The forest has reclaimed the open ground. Snow and ice continue their cycles. The mine entrance remains, a dark opening in the rock, leading to passages that stretch into the mountain's cold interior. Eloise Trent's name appears in one national database of missing persons. The entry is brief. It lists her age, physical description, and the location where she was last seen. It notes that the circumstances of her disappearance are undetermined. It provides a contact number for a regional police detachment. The number is no longer in service. The detachment was closed during a round of budget-driven consolidations. Files were transferred to a central archive. The file on Eloise Trent was among those transferred. It has not been reviewed since. Her family, if any remain, are not identified in the public record. No relatives came forward during the investigation. No one claimed her personal effects. The few items recovered from the surveying camp were held in evidence storage for the required period and then disposed of according to standard procedures. The satchel, found 70 kilometers from the mine site, was retained for several years and then likewise disposed of when storage space was needed for more current cases. There is no memorial for Eloise Trent, no grave marker, no plaque, no recognition that she existed except for the words typed on yellowed pages within a file folder stored in a climate-controlled archive room hundreds of kilometers from where she vanished. The archive is accessible by appointment only. Requests to view files must be submitted in writing and approved by a records administrator. Few requests are ever made. The file has not been opened in over a decade. The mine itself stands as the only monument, though it was never intended as such. The tunnels do not remember. The rock does not hold echoes. The darkness inside is absolute. If something remains of Eloise Trent in those passages, it exists beyond the reach of light and understanding. The mine keeps its secrets. The forest keeps its silence. The north keeps everything that enters and chooses not to release. Investigations into wilderness disappearances often end in ambiguity. The vast scale of the Northern Territories means that search efforts, no matter how thorough, can only cover a fraction of the terrain. Bodies are concealed by snow, consumed by wildlife, or simply absorbed into the landscape. Explanations remain elusive. Families are left without closure. Files are closed, not because answers have been found, but because resources have been exhausted and time has moved forward. The disappeared do not return. Their stories become fragments, partial accounts archived and forgotten. Eloise Trent entered a mine on a cold afternoon in early spring. She carried equipment and a radio. She transmitted routine updates. Then she was silent. No scream, no call for help, no final message, just silence. Searchers found nothing. Investigators found contradictions. Years found only more questions. The file was shelved. The case was suspended. The name became a notation in a database that no one consults. The mine entrance remains open to the empty valley, a black threshold that swallows light and offers nothing in return. There are other cases, other names, other mine sites where people have entered and not emerged, other forests where trails end without explanation, other valleys where radio contact fails and searchers find only emptiness. The pattern repeats across the Northern Territories. Each disappearance is officially classified as unique. Each investigation proceeds independently. But the similarities accumulate. The abandoned sites, the fragmented reports, the absence of bodies, the silence. If the files were gathered and examined together, patterns might emerge. Connections might suggest themselves, but the files remain scattered. Different jurisdictions, different archive systems, different levels of access restrictions. No centralized effort has been made to correlate the cases. No researcher has been granted the authority or the resources to conduct a comprehensive analysis. The disappearances remain isolated incidents, unconnected data points on a map too large to comprehend. Eloise Trent was 27 years old. She had a life before March 3rd. She had worked other jobs. She had lived in other places. She had made decisions that led her to that remote valley on that particular day. The file contains none of that history. It contains only the end. 14 pages of reports, 3 maps, 1 photograph, and silence. The photograph shows her standing beside a truck. The forest rises behind her. The ground is white with snow. Her face is turned slightly away. Her expression is unreadable. Whoever took the photograph did not record their name. The image exists without context, a moment frozen with no before and no after. Just a figure in a winter landscape, standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. The mine waits in the valley. The tunnels remain. The darkness does not change. Spring comes and the snow melts. Summer brings brief warmth. Autumn returns cold. Winter seals everything again under ice. The cycle continues. The forest grows. The structures rot. The rock endures. And somewhere in that cold network of passages carved into the mountain, a question remains unanswered. A name remains unaccounted for. A disappearance remains unexplained. The file will not be opened again unless someone requests it. No one will request it. The case is too old, the location too remote, the leads too cold. The name means nothing to current investigators who have their own cases, their own missing persons, their own unanswered questions. Eloise Trent has joined the silent archive of the vanished, those who stepped into the northern wilderness and were consumed by it. The file exists as proof that she was real, that she disappeared, that someone once tried to find her. But the file offers no answers.